My name is Sofia Rodriguez, and today I want to share with you a story that marked my life forever. It is not only a story of faith, but also of transformation, doubts, and decisions that changed my destiny. Since I was little, I was raised in a deeply religious home, where the Catholic faith was not only a belief, but the central axis of our family life. Growing up in such an environment shaped my values, my perception of the world, and above all, my desire to find a greater purpose.
Since I was a child, I dreamed with dedicating my life to God. I saw in religious devotion as a way to transcend, to give meaning to my existence, and to find answers to questions that tormented me since I was very young. The church was my refuge, my safe place, the space where I felt I could be myself, same without fear, neither doubts. However, with the passage of the time, I understood that the faith is not only about praying and following rules, but also about questioning, seeking the truth and being honest with yourself. My decision to enter the convent was not made on the spur of the moment. I passed years feeling that called, listening to my heart and convincing myself that this was the path correct. My family, although surprised, supported my choice. And when I finally crossed the doors of the convent, I felt like I was giving the most important step of my life. I never imagined, at that moment, everything I was about to discover, not even the internal battle that I would have to face to find my true voice. When I arrived at the convent, first I felt was a deep silence. It was not a silence of peace but an emptiness, as if the outside world had been left completely behind. I was greeted by the Mother Superior, a woman with a firm gaze and a stern face who did not show emotion some when giving me the welcome. I was assigned a small cell with an austere bed, a cross on the wall and a tiny window that barely let in any light. That night, while I held my rosary in my hands, repeating to myself same one that had taken the decision correct, but a concern unknown began to grow inside me. The first day in the convent was completely different from what I imagined. I had been spoken of a life of prayer, reflection, and spiritual peace, but what I found, it was a strict routine, full of unbreakable rules and an environment where the obedience was the only answer acceptable. They woke us up before the sunrise with the sound of bells, and the day it was carefully structured between prayers, physical work, and long moments of absolute silence. At first, I thought this was all part of the adaptation process, but with the time, I realized that it was not just about discipline, but about control. The other novices seemed resigned to that life, some with calm expressions, and others with a sadness they could not hide. I observed every detail, trying to find some sign of comfort, some word kind to make me feel that I was in the right place. However, the only thing I received, they were shifty glances, and a constant feeling that something was not right. Well, the Mother Superior constantly reminded us that the sacrifice was the basis of our faith, that the pain brought us closer to God, and the only way to reach the holiness was leaving behind our individuality. During the first week, I felt my spirit weakening. I clung to the idea that this was a test, that God was measuring my faith and what I should bear it all with patience. But inside me, an insistent voice began to ask me questions that I didn't want to answer. Was this what I really wanted for my life? Did God really want his daughters lived under a regime of rules unbreakable and sacrifices that seemed to have no end? These doubts tormented me, but I did not dare to share them with nobody. The nights in the convent were the most difficult. While the others were sleeping, I remained wake up, looking at the cross in the wall and wondering if I had made a mistake error. I remembered my home, the warmth of my family, the laughter from my childhood, and the freedom to simply be me. But I was forced to keep quiet those thoughts, telling me that I was part of the process, which would soon find the peace that he longed for. However, with each passing day, that peace seemed to disappear, get further and further away. The atmosphere inside the convent was dense, almost suffocating. Everything had to become in silence, without question, without express emotions. The furtive glances between the sisters and the muffled whispers in the hallways made me feel like there were secrets hidden behind those walls. I couldn't help but wonder, what was it that nobody wanted to say out loud? There was a feeling of unease floating around in the air, a sensation that told me I had to be alert. At the end of the first week, I realized that the convent was not what I had imagined. It was not only a place of prayer and devotion, but a space where silence was used as a form of control, where the faith was mixed with fear, and where the obedience was demanded without explanations. But I wasn't ready to accept yet the true. I told myself saying that maybe it was only a matter of time, that with the days I would learn to find peace in the midst of all that. I didn't know that, actually, that was just the beginning of my awakening. Daily in the convent continued the same pattern. At 5 o'clock tomorrow, the bells rang in the corridors, calling us to the first prayer of the day. We got up, in complete silence. We dressed in our habits and walked in line until the chapel. There, under the dim candlelight, we repeated prayers from memory, with the head bowed and hands clasped. At first, I thought that this silence would be a way of finding God, of listening His voice in the deepest part of my soul. But with the time, I discovered that it was everything contrary. The silence in the convent was not a means of reflection, but an imposition. We were taught that talking too much was a sign of selfishness, that expressing thoughts personal could lead us to the sin of pride. If some novice tried to start a conversation outside of the permitted moments, she was reprimanded with a stern look or with days of penance in isolation. I soon realized that we were not encouraged to share our concerns here, but to suppress them. And the more I tried, accept these rules, the more I felt that something inside me was beginning to break. Physical work was another essential part of our routine. We spent hours cleaning the hallways, washing clothes by hand, working in the gardens or preparing food in the kitchen. Every task should become with precision and without distraction. The Mother Superior was watching us with attention relentless, making sure none of us let down our guard. "Effort purifies us," he repeated, with his deep voice. But deep inside, I wondered if God really wanted us to purify ourselves through fatigue and suffering. Little by little, I began to notice small details that worried me. The furtive glances between some novices, the whispers that faded away when someone was approaching, the nights in the ones that some sisters older disappeared from the bedrooms without explanation. Everything seemed wrapped in an air of mystery, as if there was something beyond the daily routine, something we were not allowed to know. But no one. I was talking about it. And I didn't have it yet. The value of asking. Despite everything, I tried to convince me that I was in the right place. He told me that it was normal to feel disoriented at first, that I should trust His process and move forward with faith. But in the at night, when I was alone in my cell, I couldn't ignore the weight that was growing in my chest. Why the peace that I was looking for so much followed out of my reach. Why I felt that instead of getting closer to God, I was moving further and further away from myself. Same. The days became in weeks, and even though I tried hard in following the routine without questions, something inside me was resisting. There was an instinct, a voice inside me that told me I should open my eyes, that I should be attentive to what was happening around me. But I still didn't know that I was looking for, neither that so dangerous it could be finding the answer. Was so when I met Teresa, the only person in the convent that seemed to share my doubts. With a simple whisper, planted in the first seed of concern. Not everything is what it seems here. At that moment, I did not understand the magnitude of his words, but she would soon discover that they held more truth than she was prepared to accept. After weeks immersed in the routine of the convent, Teresa was the first to talk to me with sincerity. His voice was a whisper in half of absolute silence. Not everything is what it seems here, he told me one afternoon while we were cleaning the chapel. His words resonated in my mind for days. What did he mean? Why? I was speaking in such a cautious tone as if he had afraid of being heard. From that moment on, I knew I had found someone who, like me, also had doubts. Teresa was one of the most reserved novices. She did not participate in the few conversations allowed and always. She seemed immersed in deep thoughts. But when our eyes met, I understood that in its interior had the same questions that tormented me. During the nights and when the convent was in complete darkness, I began to notice that she remained wakes up, just like me, as if the weight of routine weighed on him prevented the reconciliation of dream. One night, I gathered the courage to speak with she. I waited until the other novices fell asleep and I approached her cell in silence. "What you wanted say he other day?" I asked in a low voice. Teresa looked at me with caution before answering. "Here there are things we can't say out loud," she whispered. If you ask too many questions, you start to become in a problem. The answer left me frozen. I didn't expect that life in the convent was easy, but neither I imagined that silence was a way of hiding something else. Since that time conversation, our friendship was strengthened in the secret. We were talking when nobody could listen to each other. We shared our concerns and we gave each other mutually supportive. Teresa told me that she had been feeling for months that something the convent did not fit, that the rules not only served to bring us closer to God, but also to control us. "Have you ever felt like you were being watched?" he asked me one night. I did too. There was had that feeling, but until then I had not dared to admit it. As our talks became more frequent, I discovered that Teresa had tried to escape of the convent once. She told me that she had been reprimanded and punished by the Mother Superior, who you warned that the disobedience was a serious offense before the eyes of God. "We cannot simply, let's go," he told me, with a whisper trembling. They made us believe that this was our only destiny. His words terrified me. Did we really have no option? That conversation left me with more questions than answers. If the convent was a place of faith and love, why someone would you like to escape from him? Why? The Mother Superior punished so harshly to those who they questioned the rules. I knew I couldn't ask questions openly, but my instinct told me to be alert. Something inside me told me that I should discover the true, although that would mean facing what a stranger. What I didn't know in it was at that moment that my search for answers would lead me to discover secrets that would change my life forever, and that, once I knew the true, there would be no turning back. After weeks immersed in the routine of the convent, Teresa was the first in talk to me with sincerity. His voice was a whisper in half of absolute silence. "Not everything is what it seems here," he told me one afternoon while we were cleaning the chapel. His words resonated in my mind for days. What did he mean? Why? I was speaking in such a cautious tone, as if he had afraid of being heard. From that moment on, I knew I had found someone who, like me, also had doubts. Teresa was one of the most reserved novices. She did not participate in the few conversations allowed, and always, she seemed immersed in deep thoughts. But when our eyes met, I understood that in its interior had the same questions that tormented me. During the nights and when the convent was in complete darkness, I began to notice that she remained wakes up, just like me, as if the weight of routine weighed on him prevented the reconciliation of dream. One night, I gathered the courage to speak with she. I waited until the other novices fell asleep and I approached her cell in silence. "What you wanted say he other day?" I asked in a low voice. Teresa looked at me with caution before answering. "Here there are things we can't say out loud," she whispered. "If you ask too many questions, you start to become in a problem." The answer left me frozen. I didn't expect that life in the convent was easy, but neither I imagined that silence was a way of hiding something else. Since that time conversation, our friendship was strengthened in the secret. We were talking when nobody could listen to each other. We shared our concerns and we gave each other mutually supportive. Teresa told me that she had been feeling for months that something the convent did not fit, that the rules not only served to bring us closer to God, but also to control us. "Have you ever felt like you were being watched?" he asked me one night. I did too. There was had that feeling, but until then I had not dared to admit it. As our talks became more frequent, I discovered that Teresa had tried to escape of the convent once. She told me that she had been reprimanded and punished by the Mother Superior, who you warned that the disobedience was a serious offense before the eyes of God. "We cannot simply, let's go," he told me, with a whisper trembling. They made us believe that this was our only destiny. His words terrified me. Did we really have no option? That conversation left me with more questions than answers. If the convent was a place of faith and love, why someone would you like to escape from him? Why? The Mother Superior punished so harshly to those who they questioned the rules. I knew I couldn't ask questions openly, but my instinct told me to be alert. Something inside me told me that I should discover the true, although that would mean facing what a stranger. What I didn't know it was at that moment that my search for answers would lead me to discover secrets that would change my life forever, and that, once I knew the true, there would be no turning back. The logbook we found in the library became into an obsession for Teresa and me. Each page contained donation details made to the convent by families who, according to I remembered, they barely had enough to survive. I wondered, how is it possible that people in situations so precarious hand over such large sums of money? Was it an act of extreme devotion, or was there something else behind those numbers? For several days, we tried to decipher the patterns in the donations. Some names were repeated with frequency, while others seemed to disappear from one moment to the next. There were exorbitant amounts recorded from people I knew they lived in poverty. Were they being forced to give that money? Was it possible that the convent was manipulating the faithful to obtain resources? The more we analyzed his notebook, more questions arose, and with them, the fear that they were watching us. Was so when I remembered the visit I made with the Sister Lucia to that one devoted family. I remembered the expression in the face of the women when delivered his donation, the sadness in his eyes, the way he squeezed hands with resignation, and at that moment, I didn't want to see it. But now I understood that this was not a voluntary act, but a form of pressure disguised as faith. One night, Teresa and I decided to investigate further, but this time with more caution. We knew that if we were discovered, we could face severe punishment. We hid the notebook between our belongings, and we agreed to take turns to keep watch while the other had analyzed. Each page was a piece of a puzzle dark that terrified us. However, the fear did not take long and reach us. One day, while we were cleaning the cloister, the Mother Superior called us to her office. I felt his stomach contract at the sight of the severity in his face. Novices must focus in his devotion, and not in matters that do not concern them, he said in a cold voice. He did not mention a notebook, but we both knew that her warning was no coincidence. They were watching us. That night, Teresa insisted in which we should stop us. "They're going to discover us," she whispered in anguish. But I felt like I couldn't turn back now. We had found something that could change everything, something that explained his fear in the eyes of so many people. "If we leave this here, we will never know the true," I replied. I knew we were in danger, but the true could no longer be ignored. What we didn't know was that very soon, what we discovered would force us to make a decision that would change our lives forever. After the warning from the Mother Superior, the atmosphere inside the convent became even more oppressive. The looks of the sisters older. They seemed to follow us everywhere, as if they were waiting for us to commit an error. We knew they were watching us, that any motion falsely could mean a punishment from which there might be no return. But that was not worse. It was worse to give us realize that we were not alone in our doubts. Little by little, we began to notice that other novices were also showed signs of restlessness. Some they avoided talk with. We are afraid of being associated with our insubordination. But in his eyes, there was a spark of something we recognized very good. The fear. Not fear of God or of sin, but of what might happen if they dared to question what was imposed on us as absolute truth. The Mother Superior used to repeat that the obedience was the most important virtue within the convent. We were taught that the sacrifice brought us closer to God, whose suffering was the proof of our love for Him. But the line between the voluntary sacrifice and abuse of power became increasingly blurred. It was as if the faith would have become a tool of submission rather than a path of enlightenment. We were forced to confess constantly, not only to purify the soul, but to reveal any thought of doubt or rebellion. The penances were severe for those who, they admitted to feeling uncertainty about their vocation. Some novices passed days in fasting, others were punished with long days of exhausting physical labor. God's will demands discipline, they told us. But in a background, we knew it was not the will of God that was behind these punishments, but the desire to keep ourselves under control. Sometimes, in the chapel, I found myself praying not to feel the presence of God, but to find strength and resist the eyes, and wondered if God really wanted us to live with fear. If the path toward the holiness, it was to be paved with pain. Every day, my faith was shaking more. Not because I would no longer believe in God, but because He could not accept that such a great love was based in the humiliation and punishment. Teresa and I tried to talk with some novices in private, but the most I was afraid say something. The convent had managed to convert her fear in part of the faith. "We can't do anything," they told us, several times. But I refused to accept that answer. Something inside me, a voice I could no longer ignore, told me I had to get out of there. I knew it wouldn't be easy, I knew that if we tried to escape, they wouldn't let us. Do it without consequences. But there was one certainty I couldn't ignore. If I stayed in the convent, sooner or later I would lose my will, my essence, and my ability to think for myself. Same. And that possibility terrified me more than any punishment. The days passed by, and the weight of the secret we carried became more and more unbearable. We knew that we were being watched, that the Mother Superior suspected us, and that any past falsely could seal our destiny within those walls. However, we could not ignore the "it's true" that we had discovered. The donations forced, the constant fear, unjustified punishments. Everything indicated that the convent was not a place of faith, but of control. So when one night, we heard something that would change everything. While the convent was sleeping, Teresa and I woke up startled by a sound that came of the hallway. They were not the steps routine of the sisters older, but something more. A murmur, low voices, almost a lament. We looked at each other, the darkness, feeling the same terror running through us, the skin. Without. After thinking about it too much, we got out of our beds and approached the door with caution. The voices, they came from one of the corridors that led to the restricted area of the convent, the one we were never allowed to cross. We moved silently, trying not to be discovered, and we hid behind a column. From there, we could see two sisters older carrying one of the novices. The girl could hardly keep standing. His expression was a mix of confusion and exhaustion. He was mumbling something, but his voice was too low to understand. Was in that moment when I felt that the ground beneath my feet disappeared. If the convent was a place of love and devotion, why someone would be in that state? Why they were carrying in middle of the night, away from the others? We knew that if they discovered us there, we would be severely punished, but also we understood that we could no longer sit idly by. Something terrible was happening, and we had to find a way to find out what it was. That night, when we returned to our beds, Teresa looked at me with the eyes full of fear. "We can't stay here anymore," he whispered. I nodded. There was arrived the time to make a decision. Either we ran away from the convent, and we were looking for the true outside those walls, or we stayed there until our willpower was completely broken. But escaping would not be easy. We had been taught from day one that going out of the convent without permission was a grave sin, a betrayal of our faith. And yet worse, we knew that no one, absolutely no one, who had tried to leave, had achieved. That night, for the first time, I felt like my faith was not putting in God, but in the possibility of leaving alive from that place. After that night, something inside me changed forever. Until that moment, still housed the hope that everything had a logical explanation, that perhaps we were exaggerating, that maybe the severity of the convent was only part of an extreme spiritual discipline. But when I saw that novice being carried in the darkness, I understood that what was happening within those walls was more darker than ever I imagined. Teresa and I became more careful with each step we took. We knew we couldn't trust nobody. Every glance we exchanged with other novices could be a risk. Every word that came out of our mouth could reach the ears of the Mother Superior. We had stopped being two young people with doubts. Now we were fugitives in power. But escaping the convent was not something she could do. Become without a plan. The doors were closed with key every night, and the stone walls, they were too high to climb. Without help. Besides, we didn't know what was waiting for us outside. Where would we go? We didn't have money, nor clothes adequate, nor a place to take refuge. Our only advantage was that we had been forced to learn every corner of the convent with our daily chores. We knew where were the entrances, the cellars, the rooms forbidden. We just needed to find a way out. Unseen. Was so when I remembered that, in the area of the kitchen, there was a small one-door rear facing a orchard. It was not an exit directly to the outside, but it would bring us closer enough to the lowest wall of the convent. If we managed to get there undetected, perhaps we could find a way to climb out and escape. But there was a problem still major. If they caught us, we didn't know what they would do to us. Heard stories of novices who had disappeared after disobeying. They were not spoken of. Their names were never mentioned again. It was as if they had never existed. Would it happen to us even if we failed? The fear was paralyzing, but we knew that staying was not an option. If we didn't leave soon, the convent would consume us. We would become in shadows, like so many others that had accepted their destiny without a fight. We had to escape. and we had to do it soon. We had waited for the right moment for days. Every night, we watched with attention the movements of the Sisters Older. We memorized the watchmen's schedules, and we analyzed every possible escape route. We knew we wouldn't get a second chance. If we failed, the Mother Superior would make sure we never tried again. The chosen night arrived faster than we imagined. We prepared ourselves with the little we had, extra clothing under the habit to protect ourselves of the cold, a piece of bread hidden in the pockets, and a little rosary which, ironically, had become my only source of comfort in half of the fear. We waited until the midnight, when the convent was immersed in the darkness and silence. We knew that some Sisters Older were hovering the hallways, but we were counting with our advantage. We knew every corner of the convent better than anyone else. I breathed deep before taking the first step out of my cell, feeling how my heart beat with force in my chest. Teresa followed me closely, her gaze reflecting the same mixture of terror and determination that I felt. We moved stealthily, sticking to the walls to avoid being seen. Every creak of the ground beneath our feet made us contain the breathing. When we arrived at the kitchen, we stopped. We knew that the door rear was insured with a latch, but we had found a way to open it days ago, using a hairpin that Teresa had kept secret. When we were about to open the door, we heard a sound that froze us blood. Footsteps. Someone was approaching. We hid behind a supply rack, holding the breathing while a shadow slipped in the gloom. It was one of the Sisters Older. His gaze scanned the room for a moment that seemed eternal. If he discovered us, it would all be over. But, for some reason, continued walking and disappeared into the aisle. We looked at each other with her soul in suspense, knowing that it was now or never. With trembling hands, Teresa slid the fork in a latch, and the door opened with a slight squeak. We slipped outside, feeling the cold of the night hit our face. The garden stretched out in front of us, and beyond that, the wall that separated us from the freedom. All we had left was cross it. But what we didn't know was that we hadn't completely escaped yet. Someone was waiting for us. Cold air of the night enveloped us while we crossed a vegetable patch with quick steps, trying not to make noise. Our objective was the wall, the last barrier between the convent and the freedom. However, as we get closer, a chill ran down my spine. I felt a presence before I saw it. A silhouette emerged from the shadows. The Mother Superior was waiting for us by the wall, with the arms crossed and the face imperturbable. His gaze was absolutely cold, as if he had known everything time what we were trying to do. I knew this moment would come, he said, with a calm voice, almost as if had planned. Disobedience always reveals itself same. Teresa and I stopped dry. My mind was working frantically, searching for a way out. There was no way back without being caught, but we couldn't move forward either, without confront her. The Mother Superior was not alone. At her side, two Sisters Older people watched us with stern expression, blocking us. He passed. Why are they holding us back? Here, I asked with a threat of voice, feeling as the desperation was accumulating in my chest. What is really going on in this convent? The Mother Superior let out a slight smile, but her eyes remained relentless. We do what is necessary to preserve the faith, he replied. To maintain the order, to save souls, even from themselves, same. His answer froze me blood. Teresa, with he pale-faced but with fierce determination, he gave a pass forward. This is not faith, he said, with bravery. This is fear. This is manipulation. The silence that followed his words was deafening. The Mother Superior looked with a mixture of disappointment and pity. You have too much spirit for a novice, he whispered, and that is dangerous. The danger in his voice was unmistakable. We knew that if we didn't escape in that moment, we would never have it again other chance. With a quick movement, Teresa took my hand and ran toward the wall. The Sisters Older. They tried stop us, but the momentum of the fear and adrenaline drove us toward forward. We managed to climb with a speed that I would never have believed possible. When scoped the top of the wall, I looked toward down. Teresa already had jumped to the other side. The Mother Superior was watching us from below. Her expression, it was no longer anger, but something more disturbing, an eerie calm, as if he knew that escape did not mean the end of everything. I jumped. When my feet touched the land cold of on the other hand, I felt that for the first time in years, I could breathe. but the voice of the Mother Superior resonated in the night before we got lost in the darkness. They can't escape from the faith. We ran without looking back. We didn't know what to do where we were going. We just had to move away as quickly as possible of the convent. The ground beneath our feet was unstable, covered with branches and stones that threatened to make us fall. The cold air cut our skin, but not us. We stopped. Fear drove us. The it made us desperate forces. Behind us, we heard no screams or steps hurried. That silence was even more terrifying. We did not. They chased him because he didn't needed. The Mother Superior was convinced that the faith or the fear that had been instilled in us would make us return for our account. But that wasn't going to happen. After several minutes of running, our legs began to falter. We stopped under a tree, trying to recover the breath. The night was dark, without moon. Neither stars to guide us, only the infinite blackness of the forest and the sound of our own labored breathing. And now what? Teresa asked, with the trembling voice. I didn't have answer. We had never thought about what would come after. The only goal was to get out of the convent, but now that it is we had achieved, we were in an unknown world, without money, without home, and without no one to whom to resort to. Thing was to seek help, but from whom? If we returned to the nearest village, the nuns could find us. Surely they had told a version of the history in that we were two young people strayed, unable to accept the will of God. We can't stay here, I said, trying to keep calm. We have to move on. Teresa nodded, and with no other options, we resumed the march. We did not know that the elderly danger still awaited us further ahead. We continued walking through the forest for hours. The ground was wet. The cold was creeping in on us in the bones, and our forces were beginning to run out. We hadn't eaten since day before, and the adrenaline of the flight began to fade, leaving in its place the weight of the tiredness and the uncertainty. The biggest problem was not just the hunger or the cold, but paranoia. Every noise made us jump. The crack of a branch, the howl far from an animal. Even the whisper of the wind made us think that someone was following us. We knew that the convent had influence, which could to have sent someone to look for us. And so, worst of all, if they found us, no one would believe us. We walked until our feet could go no further. We stopped next to a little stream, just a thread of water that was reflected in the darkness. We drank greedily, and we sat down in a floor wet, shivering with cold. What if they find us? Teresa asked quietly. I didn't know what to answer. We couldn't stay in the forest forever, but we couldn't just appear into people and ask for help without risk. We have to keep going, I said finally. If we stop, they'll find us. Teresa nodded, but her eyes reflected the same. I'm afraid that I felt. We were nothing more than two young people escaping from a place that had everything under control. Could we really beat something that big? So when we listened, the sound of footsteps. Not them, We looked at each other, frozen in terror. Someone was close. We stood still, holding back the breathing. The sound of the steps became increasingly clear. They were slow, measured, as if someone I was walking knew exactly where we were. My heart beat so strongly that I felt that in any moment would betray me. Teresa grabbed me of the arm with strength. His eyes reflected pure panic. We didn't know whether to run, hide, or stay still, and pray that whoever, whether it was or not, there would pass by. The silhouette appeared among the trees. At first, I couldn't make out who it was, but as it got closer, the dim light of the moon illuminated his face. She was a sister of the convent. She was not the Mother Superior, nor one of the sisters' older people who always watched us with severity. She was one of the novices like us. Seeing her, I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Was she looking for us to help us or to take us back? They have to go now, she whispered, her voice barely a thread of air. They know they escaped. They are not far. We looked at Teresa, not knowing whether to believe her. How do you know that? Teresa asked. A murmur. The young girl looked backwards, making sure no one else was nearby. Me too. I tried to escape once. His words were a blow in his stomach. I do, and I succeeded. They brought me back. They punished me. They made me promise never to try again. But I don't want you to go through it same. A shiver ran down my back. What always we had suspected was true. There was others before us, and they had not managed to get out. Take this path, he continued. pointing. "A path narrow between the trees. Don't go to the village. Look for a place to hide until it is safe. If the find them, never will let go." We had no reason to trust she, but neither we had other option. We looked at each other one last time and without saying anything else, we started running. We ran through the path without looking back. Every step was a fight against the fear, against the exhaustion, against the uncertainty of what was to come after, but above all, against the possibility that, at any moment, they would catch us and return us to the place from which we had worked so hard to escape. The forest seemed endless. Darkness enveloped us, and only instinct guided us. In my mind, the words of the young novice echoed again and again. If the find them, never let them go. I couldn't help but think of all the people who they had tried before us, and any price they had paid for their disobedience. After what seemed like hours, the vegetation, it began to clear up. We saw lights along the far away. It was not the town close to the convent, but a main road. For the first time, we felt that the freedom was within our reach. We approached cautiously. We didn't know if we had to trust in someone, but we knew we couldn't stay in the forest for longer. Teresa and I looked at each other. We were dirty, with torn habits and sore feet. We looked like two wandering souls, in the evening. Was so when we saw a carriage stopped at the side of the path. A man elderly went down boxes in the back, without lend us attention. We stopped, not knowing what to do. If we asked for help, we ran the risk of being reported. If we continued, we didn't know how much longer we could hold out. "We have to try," Teresa whispered, the broken voice. I gathered the little courage I had left and I approached the man. "Sir," my voice came out barely audible. "We need aid." The man turned and looked us up and down. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at us, as if he understood immediately what was happening. Finally, he let go a sigh and nodded. "Get in," he said in a low voice. "I don't want trouble, but I don't want I can leave them here." We didn't think twice. We climbed into the carriage and hid among the boxes. We didn't know where it was taking us, but for the first time in a lot time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a chance to start over. While he carriage, I moved forward. I supported the head against the wood and closed the eyes. We didn't know what was waiting for us in the future, but the most important thing was this: we had escaped. For the first time in years, we were free. Escaping the convent was just the beginning of a new path. The freedom we so longed for did not only mean getting away from those walls, but also recovering our voice, our will, and our ability to choose our own destiny. But the question that remained in my heart was, how many more followed trapped in that place, believing that they did not have other option? Throughout my life, I have understood that the faith should not be imposed with fear, neither with punishments, but lived with love and truth. God gave us free will so that we can decide how to follow Him, without chains, neither impositions. And if there is something I want leave with this story, is that nobody should feel that the only way to serve God is through the suffering. The true faith does not enslave, it liberates. If this story has touched you, if at some point you felt that you were trapped in a path you did not choose, I want to tell you that always there is other option. Don't have fear of searching for answers, of questioning, of finding your own path toward the faith and the true. Because God does not call to live with fear, but with love and purpose. If you want to continue exploring stories like this, if you want to strengthen your faith from a place of truth and love, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and follow this path with me. Share this video with someone who needs and leave me in the comments that you think about this story. Thanks for joining me in this testimony. Remember, the faith is an act of love, not imposition. See you in the next video. God bless you.